Welcome to Afros and Audio's Black History Month interview series. My name is Talib Jasir, founder and CEO of Afros and Audio Podcast Festival and the Vanguard Podcast Network. I'm excited to spotlight 29 outstanding podcast creatives and professionals. Let me read that again because I missed the word. I'm excited to spotlight 29 outstanding indie podcast creators and professionals who answered the call to be a part of this series. Welcome and thank you for being here. How are you?
I am well, man. Living the dream. I'm trying to stay warm because, we got this cold front coming across the country, man. And so here in the South, we don't normally get like snowstorms, but here we are. So, but I'm good, man. I'm good.
All right. Well, it's currently snowing outside as well. And although I don't consider myself in the South, living in New York, when they say I'm going south, I'm like, where are you going? They say Baltimore. I'm like, that's okay. If it's the South, it's the South.
Fair enough. Listen, right. I get it. I get
it. Yeah. So anyway, but great having you, man. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. So let's jump in. Mm-hmm. You've been a prominent figure in the podcasting world since 2016. Could you share with us what initially drew you to podcasting and how you've seen the landscape evolve since then?
That's a great question. So I first got on the scene, pre-podcasting, I was writing a blog, writing a business blog, because when you start a business, me and my wife, we started a company, an education consulting firm. When you write a business, you get a lot of questions from friends, families, foes, and the like about like, hey, how do you start a company? What do you do? How do you get an LLC? All this other stuff. And so I would answer these questions. I was like, Lord, let me just write a blog. I'll write a blog, put it out there. That way I don't have to keep answering the same question over and over and over again. And so as my wife's like, hey, I've heard about this thing called podcasting. You may want to kind of check it out, right? So I took about a month through YouTube University. And just learned about podcasting and learned about, how to host a show, where to host a show, editing. And we already had a few pieces of equipment here. We had a laptop, a Mac. So, I already had a GarageBand on it. So there was the editing software. And we had worked on a previous project, Talib, where we had a snowball mic, the little white microphone through, Blue or whatever. And so we just started from there, and I started my first show, November 1st, 2016, the Startup Life podcast. And so it took me 6 hours to record a 30-minute show because I kept, we're in the flight path of FedEx, so a lot of planes fly over and stuff like that, right? But one of the things, Talib, that I wanted to make a bet on was as around 2016, I started noticing that one, not a lot of people knew what a podcast was, right? There was a sizable amount of people, but not as much as now. And I start seeing when cars start rolling off the assembly line that in-dash touchscreen audio. And I was like, I feel like that's going to be the entry point that get more and more people engaged in the podcasting, right? And so I went all in on podcasts. I started the Startup Life, did over 300 episodes with that. Until we put it to rest in 2021. I started doing some other projects, but man, like that was the start. That was the breaking point, and it's just been a lot of evolution since then, man. I tell people all the time I am jealous of new podcasters because of all the tools, AI, resources, groups, things like Afros and Audio that are available to them now that wasn't around back then, right? You kind of had to figure a lot of stuff out on your own. And so with that, it's a lot of silos and stuff like that. So it's great to have community like Afros and Audio to kind of help, put that together and collaborate and stuff like that. So.
That's awesome, man. Very insightful. I get in my car now and go to CarPlay and I push podcasts.
Correct.
I'm on my way.
Right.
So yeah, that's awesome that you had the foresight about that, and that knowing that this podcasting is a new term, but broadcast and audio and getting our stories across through audio is not new. Right. And so to even be in that mindset of like, this could work. Like this is a thing.
Well, the thing is, like, people have been trying to kill off radio for years. Mm-hmm. Like when TV came around, like, oh, there's the death of radio. And then when something else came around, oh, this is the death of radio. And I think this is just the next, and people say that about podcasting being the death of radio. But I think that audio, experience, I don't think that'll ever go away. I think the delivery system will change over time and it will evolve over time, but whether it be radio, podcast, audio-based social media platforms, I think just the evolution changes, not necessarily the medium itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to your point, like even Afros and Audio started out as a online community for audio fiction, very specific,
Right.
very niche. Um, and like you said, I'm looking around like, where are they? They're not coming. So what do I do? And then it evolved into the conference, but we were really being innovative, from our own minds, and then getting into the marketplace and finding out, and we have learned
Right.
that, indeed you have to F around in order to find out. So
You do.
that's
You
actually what
really
you have to
do.
do. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
really do. You really do. Because listen, I mean, you can do all the research. Like I said, I did that whole month research and stuff like that before I started. But like, you really do have to fly off that cliff and build the
Mhm.
parachute or the plane or whatever on the way down. Because sometimes, whether it be podcasting or business or whatever, like, you only know what you know until you engage in the process. And I tell a lot of new podcasters that, like, listen, I can give you all the insight, all the things I screwed up, but at the end of the day, you got to jump off that cliff, right? So no, you really do have to F around and find out. You really do.
Word up, word up. So your current podcast, Black is America, focuses on lesser known African American figures and stories. What
Mm-hmm.
inspired you to create a podcast with such a unique and powerful theme?
So the thing for Black is America, it actually kind of started, even with the startup life, just the way the Black is America is constructed. Because even with the startup life, before I, stopped that show, I was toying around with nonfiction narrative and storytelling and presenting audio in a different way. So that's one part of it. And the second part of it was my wife, shared with me, I believe it was either a social media post or an article or something, where a Hollywood producer fixed their mouth to say every story that has needed to be told has already been told. And for people who look like me and you, Talib, we know that ain't true. And so there's tons of stories to be told. And so I kind of took it as a challenge to say, you know what, let's I could tell the stories of a Frederick Douglass or Mary McLeod Bethune and just go through dates and timelines and share with you, or I can create an audio experience to present our history in a cool and unique way. And so that's how Black is America was born. And so I just wanted to show that that people can look like us, do amazing things, but also that the story of America is incomplete without people who look like me and you to live. I mean, people like to say all the time that sorry, I got somebody at the door right now. My apologies. People like to say all the time that, like, our contributions don't matter. We're in an era of people banning books. We're in an era of CRT, and people like to spout that narrative. We have books out there right now that are, changing the word of enslavement to just workers now. Like, we had like the option to, like, put in a 2 weeks notice and just bounce from the plantation. And that's simply just not true. So Black is America is really an aim to kind of counter the narrative of not only counter that narrative, but also to share with people who look like me and you to live that, like, listen, we've done amazing things and they shouldn't be discounted.
Absolutely. I've listened to Black is America. I love the creativity, the creative aspects that you have folded into the podcast. Was that initial? Did it grow into what we are experiencing like today in the podcast?
There was, like I said, there was always pieces there because I was trying some stuff with the Startup Life, which is a traditional chat show, that ping pong back and forth, whatever. So there was some stuff that I was trying there, but even with the first episode of John Fox, it grew over time, right? It grew into, honestly, Talib, to where I didn't have to use as much sound design as I was before, right? I was actually listening to Adele give a talk one day. She's like, listen, when you sound design, you don't have to have every single piece of element there. You just need enough to activate the theater of the mind. And so I guess, there's another cliche. We was talking offline about cliches, but this is another one. Less is more, right? And so when I heard Adele talk about that, shout out to Adele Coleman, DCP Entertainment. When I heard Adele talk about that, it really challenged me to kind of take a little bit off, right? And so from there, it just made it sound better. And also, now the writing of the scripts is different because, I mean, it takes quite quite an amount of time to do that, and also the research that goes into it. But honestly, to answer your question, it just grew over time. Like some of those foundations were there because I knew what I wanted to sound like, but the quality of it just kind of grew over time.
I love that, and I love that you mentioned the script writing of it, right? Because you do have that sort of podcast and that content that requires that research, that accurate and factual commentary.
Right.
So just a little bit, because we ain't telling people recipes here, but what is that process for you? And are you currently in a space where it's gotten easier? I know you say it's a little bit more in depth, but your process, your routines inside of it, how is that kind of unfolded for you?
So, just like anything, it's like riding a bike as a kid, right? That first couple of times you're riding a bike and you're wobbling, right? Whatever. And then maybe even a few times you fall off. And then over time you popping wheelies, jumping ramps and all the things. And so the same thing here, right? Like I think in the beginning, it took me about a good 4 or 5 weeks of research and editing and sound design for a 30-40 minute show. And so now I've been able to reduce that in half to maybe 2 weeks, right? And that's due to, again, me and being jealous of new podcasters, the resources and tools and stuff like that, in particular, like with the script or whatever, it really comes in handy for me just from a strictly the script writing piece and editing the audio part. As well. But as far as the process, I'll share this with you. So the story of John Fox is the story of a man who posthumously won the Medal of Honor. And he did that by calling an artillery strike on himself, right? Calling an artillery strike on himself. He was surrounded in this tower in Italy by Germans, and he knew there was no way for him to get out alive. So he called in made the calls, hey, bring your fire to this position point, and they fired it, and it killed him and 100 Germans. And so when I heard this story, I was like, I think I could do something interesting with it. But if Black as America is going to be different from everybody else, we need to do something else. So just give a little bit of the sauce. Basically, if you're familiar with the movie Saving Private Ryan, if you've seen that movie, the first 20 minutes of it is just this chaotic battle scene of them storming the beach of Normandy, right? And so I put it on and I turned my back and closed my eyes to the screen. So basically, I want to hear every sound, every snippet, every step, every firing of M45 machine guns and stuff like that. Because if I'm telling a World War II story, I don't want to confuse or have in a 1903 Springfield bolt-action rifle that's from World War I, when I should have an M1 Garand 1A from World War II, right? So that just goes to the level of process and detail that goes before we even record an episode, before we even do any research, or even though I guess that's part of the researching process. But I wanted to make it authentic as possible for the listener, and I want to try to put the listener in that tower with John Fox. Right. And so that's just a little bit of the process and the detail that goes into Black as America. Right. Like for instance, when I told the story of Wendell Scott, who was the first African-American NASCAR driver, I went to the local rental car company and rented a Charger, right, to kind of put myself in like that mindset of like, speeding down. Don't tell the cops. Speeding down the street and feeling the wind and stuff like that. So it really is, if people have heard of kind of method acting, if you will, this is kind of like method podcasting almost, right, where I'm trying to, as the host and the writer and the creator of this show, put myself in that field and then kind of recreate that for the listener, if that answers your question.
It does, man. And I think that is awesome. You just gave a masterclass for anybody who cares to take that course in that brief moment. It is something, when I teach audio drama, it's something I tell my students: close your eyes and listen to everything that's going on, because that's it. Right. Not you making up stuff in your head.
Right. And I'm literally trying to pinpoint, like, okay, there's a footstep here. There's crying here. There's somebody, being whatever here or whatever. Right. Like, you're trying to isolate those moments so that way you can figure out, okay, it makes sense to put this here and not here. Right. Because one thing I mean, if I'm doing a history show, I can't have an anachronism or something that's out of place as far as time or whatever in there, because that's not authentic. I mean, could I've gotten away with it? Sure. But that's not how you get to the next level in this game if there's something that you want to do. So if you're trying to be different, you got to do different.
Absolutely. And it also goes, and I'll land it with this, to your care for your audience, your listeners, and what you create, right? And because of that, it's going to be an excellence as best as possible.
Absolutely.
And so I really respect that. I love that, man. So thank you for sharing that. Those were some off the cuff questions, but just part of the conversation. I got curious, man.
Oh, no, it's all good.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So as someone who has interviewed some very high profile individuals like Mark Randolph and Tom Golisano.
You nailed it.
What key elements do you believe make for a compelling and impactful interview?
I think what makes for that is, the research. And what I mean by research is, trying to get away from the boilerplate questions that they already get asked, right? And so if I'm going to interview a Tom Golisano of Paychecks or the co-founder of Netflix, Mark Randolph, I'm not only going to go look at their bio and research their bio, I'm actually going to go and listen to other interviews they gave, right? And then when I go and listen to those interviews, I go and ask, what would if I was there in that interview, if I was like, interviewing with the primary interviewer, what would I ask? Like, what's something there that's underneath? Like, he mentioned Blockbuster. So tell me about the story when you was there with Blockbuster. Like, how did they feel about trying to buy Netflix and stuff like that? So I'm trying to figure out always what's underneath, right? What's that complimentary question, that complimentary piece that they're not asking, right? So I remember, I'll give you a classic story. I remember going through somebody's bio on a page or whatever, and they said that they farm llamas or alpacas or something like that. I can't remember. And I asked them about that. And it's like, you know what? Nobody's ever asked me that. And the only reason I put that there is to see if anybody ever read the bio, right? So sometimes, just reading the bio itself is helpful. But going beyond just, what's on the surface, right? And because when you interview people like that, they've answered the same question every which way to Sunday, right? And so you're trying to figure something out that's new, that's unique, that's different, even if it's not even business related. Right. We even got into a conversation about how Mark used to do like the survival camp for boys. Right. He had never really talked about that before with anybody else. And this predates, his time at Netflix. And that even led to how he had a connection to us here in Memphis. He used to work at a camp here in Memphis. And so that was unearthed. Right. So I think it's just going above and beyond and not just stopping and going beyond the bio to find out that research. And also in addition to that, Talib, get them to tell stories, right? Like, because one of the things, especially when it comes to, because we have a lot of shows where people are subject matter experts, if you will, right? And they tell you, oh yeah, you need to, make sure you file your LLC and make sure, there's going to be times in business where there's going to be downturns and stuff like that. But I want them to put me in that place. Tell me about the time where it was the lowest of the low. Tell me about the time where you only had 50 cents in your bank account, right? Oh, you said that, you had a meeting with them. How did that meeting go? What were the details? What were you wearing, right? Why did you wear that? Why did you go with the blue tie as opposed to the red tie? So just kind of just going deeper is something I would give as advice to those who are doing, whether it be an audio drama and you're interviewing for a nonfiction narrative or even a traditional chat show, just go further. Just go further.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love that. So your other podcast, Recovery Replay, offers a unique perspective on personal recovery journeys. Could you tell us more about the concept behind this podcast and the impact it aims to have on its listeners?
Absolutely. So with my employer, the Meadows, or Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, we just call it the Meadows for short. So with this show, my goal was to go deeper with a person's recovery journey. And I'll go back to the interview process for the job, right? So I'm in this interview with the Meadows and, they asked one of those questions like, hey, if you get this position, what would you do differently, right? And I was like, listen, this may jeopardize my potential employment here, but I'm just going to say it. You know, we tell stories of recovery from addiction, trauma, processing disorders. And when we give those visuals or whatever, it's always like somebody like walking on the beach, or they're like, you know, at a picnic table and everything's great, everything's wonderful. And you want to tell that part of the story. That's ultimately where we want people to be. But if I had just passed out drunk the night before and I'm listening to this, I can't relate to that. At least not yet. Hopefully I can, but I can't relate to that yet. Because as far as I'm concerned, you've been straight for a long time, right? And so with the recovery replay, we wanted to tell the raw, real part of the recovery journey, right? You know, I want to hear about, you know, when your wife found out that you had a sex addiction and what that conversation was like, right? And that's a real episode, right? You know, I want to find out about that moment and the phone call and stuff like that, right? And so with the recovery replay, what I aim to do is tell the story of recovery from three different perspectives, right? One of the things I love is nonlinear storytelling. So I wanted to tell the story from three different perspectives. So we tell the story of a person who's gone through the meadows from an addiction or whatever. We tell that point of the view of the story. But I feel like if I only interviewed that person, I'll only get about 80, 90, maybe 95% of the story. But the person who was like their spouse, child, best friend, they were affected too. And they have a story. And that brings us to the second part of that recovery journey. And so they share what they were seeing with their loved one, right? Like, you know, being, feeling like they're coming apart and there's nothing you can do about it. You feel like my hands are tied. I don't want to enable, but I want to help. I don't know what to do. This, that, and the other. Do I get them help? Do I not get them help? Do I let them figure it out on their own? And so that's the second part of the story, Talib. And then the third one is the clinician, where they tell us what we're seeing, what we're listening to, what we're experiencing as the listener, listening to, these amazing stories of people coming out the other side. Well, not maybe coming out the other side, but coming to a different place. Because as we know with recovery, it's an ongoing, never-ending thing, right? It's always whatever, right? And so that's why I came up with that show of Recovery Replay, because I wanted to tell the raw, real, like in your face, this is what was happening. This is how I felt at that moment type of story. And it's been, to live, very eye-opening for a lot of people. I get phone calls and text messages like, listen, I went and listened to an episode of Recovery Replay and I went and got some help. I went and talked to somebody, right? Because I felt like, because one of the things we know about addiction is that isolation piece is critical, right? When you feel like you're the only person who's been in that position, and you start hearing these other stories that not exactly the same, but they're very similar, you feel like there's hope for you, right? And so that's why I wanted to tell those stories. And I'll say this and I'll land my plane. One of our senior fellows at the Meadows, before we released it, she's been in this space for over 40 years. And she said, listen, I listened to this pilot episode. I've been telling these stories for over 40 years. This young man may have changed the way we tell stories of addiction and recovery, not just at the Meadows, but in our entire industry. And so Talib is not only, I do podcasts for a company, so it's a marketing thing. It is what it is, right? But it's also used as an educational piece. And so what Recovery Replay has become is not just a marketing thing, but an educational piece for not just our patients, but for patients of other organizations, behavioral health organizations, even some of our competitors, right? And so it just goes to show that podcasting can be very powerful and very wide reaching to literally affect somebody's life in a good way.
Absolutely. So I've got like two questions that I don't have written down, so bear with me for this conversation.
Go for it.
But it is so important, and this is such important work, man. So kudos for being in this work. This is a marketing tool of communication for your employer, Meadows.
Right.
Did you present them with this? Did they come to you? How did it come about for this to be something that you are handling at the company?
That's a great question. So I do not come from a behavioral health background. This is strictly from the strength of podcasting. So basically what happened was, let's just go back to the startup life a little bit. So basically, when I booked the co-founder of Netflix, so when you throw around, you book the co-founder of Netflix, you know, that opens some doors, right? So book the co-founder of Netflix, and my podcast, The Startup Life, kind of took a turn for the good, right? And so a whole bunch of other people, like the co-founder of Dunkin' Donuts, the co-founder of Paychex, the chief legal officer of Airbnb, the chairman of the board at JetBlue Airlines. So I started getting those type of people on the show. And so the Meadows was like, who's this skinny, awkward black kid in Memphis pulling these big time business people, right? And so they said, hey, let's have a conversation. So my predecessor had just left for NPR, and they needed a replacement for that. So they, came in, interviewed, gave me a shot, stuff like this, that, and the other, and eventually, obviously, hired me in that nature. And I originally took over this show Beyond Theory. And so this is just a show where we just talk to clinicians about some of I like to call it the law and order of behavioral health, because it's ripped from the headlines of behavioral health, right? And so then I pitched them the show Recovery Replay. So that was a show that they didn't have before. I created that for them, right? And so, and they really use it as a marketing tool, from not just as, being a standard of behavioral health, from a clinical perspective, but also being one of the leading voices and being the voice of this company through podcasting. They use it as a way, like, we're not only affecting it on, in our patients, we're affecting it on the broader scale, on the national scale, on the global scale. And the podcast is one of those tools that we do that with. And so it's this very innovative thing. So no, I actually brought that to the Meadows. They didn't have that in place at first, Recovery Replay.
That's awesome, man. And what Vanguard Podcast Network, my other business, we do podcasts for nonprofits. And I have 3 pillars when I pitched them. We want to educate, we want people to care, and we want them to get involved, right?
Right.
And so this is that, this is the work. It is necessary.
100%. 100%.
Absolutely. So I love that.
It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Okay. Like I said, it's an educational tool, not even just for the Meadows, but competing, whatever, stuff like that. So anybody has access to Recovery Replay. It's one of those things that, and at Vanguard, probably do this as well. There's pieces of the business where you got to get paid for it because you got to keep the doors open, right? But there's also pieces of the business where we're going to put it out there, because if we're trying to get business from people, then it seems only fair. We got to give them something as well, right? That's just, bringing value to the marketplace. And in a place where you talk about behavioral health and mental health in the state of, mental health that we're in currently around the world, it's vital that we have shows like Recovery Replay. So,
and one of the things I really, really love about your podcasting journey is it's just something that I advise podcasters, especially in pod fade and sustainability. It's like, writers don't write one book. Filmmakers don't make one film. Like, you can do something, you can sunset, you can do it till you've had enough of it, until it's done its work and served its purpose, and you can create something else. You can create something new. And so I really, really love that you are an example of that in your own podcasting journey.
No, I appreciate that. And, and I think honestly, for therapeutic reasons, I have multiple shows because there are things on Recovery Replay that don't make it to air. And that's because we're talking about some very sensitive stuff, right? But when I'm listening, I can't unhear it, even though you don't hear it when it makes it there. I can't unhear it. And so sometimes that small T trauma affects me, right? And so I need to go to Black is America to kind of have a space from that, right? And so sometimes having multiple projects or going to a different project can be, from a mental health standpoint, beneficial and therapeutic. So no, I appreciate you highlighting that.
Absolutely, man. So let's switch gears. You are a member of the Academy of Interactive and Visual Arts and a 2-time speaker at South by Southwest. How do these experiences influence your approach to podcasting and storytelling?
It enhances it. My work with Ava, we're listening to podcasts and judging podcasts, and it's great to see the new shows that are out there and see, how people are innovating and stuff like that. I really wish there was honestly more people of color in these spaces, especially at AVA from a judging standpoint, from part of the academy standpoint, but also, submitting for awards as well. I think a lot of times, and I get it. Sometimes the price point can be, kind of out there. I totally get it. But that's why we have things like Podcasting Seriously to kind of help with that, those funds and stuff like that. But it's important to be in those spaces. It's important to see what's new. So that way you don't get complacent as a podcaster, right? Because again, you can be in your own silo as a podcaster very easily. And then you trying to figure out why you're doing something that they've been doing since 2016 when we've moved on to 2025, right? So I think it's important to hear and listen to other podcasts, to always be growing, always be innovating and stuff like that. And as far as South by Southwest, I think it's important to do what we're doing right now. Share this expertise, share some of the sauce, right? Because, I don't mind somebody going further and beyond than me. Like that's not an issue for me, because even if from an egotistical standpoint, I can be like, I put you on that journey, right? So it's not a situation where I have to be the end all be all, but being on a platform like South by and sharing that expertise and sharing that knowledge is great for business, obviously, but it's also a great platform to share with the world about, how we do these things, how you can do these things, and how you could probably be on the South by stage one day, or on the Afros and Audio conference stage and stuff like that. So it's very important to, as my mentor would say, send the elevator back down. And I think that's why I try to do it, as many of those type of speaking engagements and stuff like this with you, Talib, as much as possible.
Well, I appreciate it, man. It's definitely some gold, man, that you are sharing. And again, not just by talking, you're being it, and that's important. And so I want to talk about awards,
Go for it.
Recognitions, right?
Go for it.
So you won 22 awards in podcasting. Congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's I don't even know nothing about that life. What would you consider your biggest win or achievement to date from those 22 awards, those recognitions, and why does it stand out for you? If there's anything specific that stands out.
So, I mean, I've been blessed to win numerous awards from numerous different agencies. Like I said, obviously from AVA to have a communicator award, and also the W3s, and also, the Signals recently. I actually won the Memphis Excellence Awards for Podcast of the Year here locally and stuff like that. It really quickly, it's also important to know that, like, everything doesn't have to be so glitz and glam when it comes to these awards, right? Even if it's a local audio competition, go for it, right? An award's an award's an award, right? So no, I don't think anyone with one award is bigger than the other one, right? Some have certain level of prestige depending on who you ask, but it is what it is, right? And then obviously had the honor of winning 2 Black Podcast awards, from editing and story, editing and sound design, if you will. So grateful to Demetrius and the Black Podcast Association for voting for me on those things. But I have to admit that the Webby was a big one. And the reason it was a big one was because of, a number of reasons. One, I got to come to a city I love so much, New York City. So anytime I get an excuse to come to New York, that's a win. But also it put me in the room of, and at the table of like people like MSNBC and the NAACP. Like we literally sat at the gala, at the awards gala, at the same table of these people and like talking to them and picking their brain and networking with them and say, hey, let's do a show swap here and there and stuff like that, or some type of collaboration. So there's that. And also, the awards gala was in May, so I was able to take my wife on an award/anniversary trip to New York City. So there's that. But, I think, and this is probably the Mamba mentality, ego kind of talking, but in that category for the Webby was ESPN and Slate. And so anytime you can hand an L to $1 billion corporations, I mean, it's kind of hard to tamp down the ego from there. You know what I mean? But it just goes to show more importantly than that though, that the independent podcaster can compete. Like this whole notion of like, oh, they got all of this, so I can't whatever. Like, I'm here to tell you, bump that. Like you can compete with them and compete with them handedly, right? And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that kind of comes from that. In addition to the Meadows saying, "Hey, we see what you're doing. Let's have a conversation." And I'll let you read between the lines, Talib. I'm still at Meadows Behavioral Healthcare, so you fill in the blank however you want with that, how that conversation went, right? But it just goes to show that, like, again, that I started 2016 in my closet with FedEx planes hovering over, right? And so now here we are in New York City, hobnobbing with Tracy Ellis Ross and SZA in the same room for the Webbies. All from stuff that started in my closet. So it just goes to show, like, if you move with intentionality, especially in this pod game, you just never know what'll happen next. Just never know.
Absolutely, man. That is awesome. That's an awesome story. And it's very encouraging. And that is one of the point and purposes of what we're even doing here right now. There's so much brilliance inside of this indie podcasting space, so much innovation and creative minds and art that's coming out of this.
And if I can say something really quickly, man, like I said,
Yes.
when I judge, the Communicator Awards and the W3 Awards, and even the Black Podcast Awards as well, I'm here to tell you, you have indie podcasters and you have big corporate podcasters in this space. The indie podcasts are better because it's the innovation, it's the freedom to like this complete blank canvases, right? I mean, true enough, you can see a big corporate podcast from a Spotify or whoever, and that's not to knock them because maybe I want to do business with them one day. But that's another question for another day. But my point is that, like, there's all these hands in the pot, and all these hands in the pot have agendas, right? And so it's like you got to meet your agenda, meet those agendas, with your podcast. So sometimes that kind of tamps down the creativity, if you will. But as the indie podcaster, you're pretty free to kind of explore some new things, try new things, and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make sure I said that as well.
And it's the difference between college players and professional players. They hungry
there
still.
Right. Right.
And the other one's already chilling, they already
exactly.
got it.
Right.
So yeah, man, it is a big distinction, and you love to see it, man, that there is so much opportunity and so much creativity inside the indie space, and we still got so much playing field.
Just scratching the surface. Scratching the surface.
Absolutely. So you talked about your wife and you were able to have this beautiful anniversary out in New York. So you talked about your podcasting has enabled you to provide for your family and help many people. Can you share one personal story or experience that highlights those changes?
Man, listen, the one that sticks out the most was going to Walt Disney World on somebody else's dime. So at the Meadows, we're always doing like conferences and events and stuff like that, right? And so I get a phone call from my VP of marketing, Sherry. She's like, "Hey, Dominic, I need you to go to this Global Exchange mental health conference. I need you to cover, get some interviews, network with people, stuff like that." Like, all right, cool. She's like, "Where is it?" I was like, "Where is it?" It's like, "It's in Orlando at Walt Disney World." I was like, "Huh? Do what now?" And so when you have kids, man, and like that's the GOAT of like, places, right? And so, and my wife, loved Disney World. She went as a kid, didn't have like the best experience, but to be able to also kind of recreate that for her as well was kind of cool as well. But like to be able to take my family to Disney World through podcasting, like it doesn't, and true enough, I had to work, right? I had to work. Well, for the most part, I'll get to that in a second. I had to work for the most part, right? But I'm like getting pictures from my wife of my daughter eating ice cream, and she ate ice cream every day. Every single day she had ice cream. But as I'm doing the work and see that, it melts my heart, man. It melts my heart to be able to say that podcast was able to provide that experience for my daughter and my wife and stuff like that. It's everything. It really is. But even though we were mostly working, one of the cool things was the sponsors knew that, all of us in Disney World couldn't really do it because we were working, but they rented out for from like 7 o'clock until they rented out Animal Kingdom just for us. And so imagine, and I've never been to Disney World, but I've heard stories of like long lines and stuff like that. But to walk through Animal Kingdom, no line, no wait, go straight up to the amusement park. And not just the people who operate the machines, but also people who's like, the food vendors, stuff like that. You just walk up, hey, let me get some popcorn. Done. Just hand it to you, right? You don't have to pay for it, right? And so for all that to be from podcasting, it's just like, that's absurd. Like, this is the point of the story where like, this is absurd. But again, it just goes to show you just never know what's around the corner when you move with intentionality in this space. And I'm here to tell you that it's very possible. Very possible.
That is a great story. It's one of my coaching philosophies. Intentionality accelerates the process.
100%.
If you ain't out here aimless, you got it in your mind. You know what you want. Now, the how is going to unfold.
Right.
But be intentional.
I always tell people, like, it's okay to be doing stuff, right? But after a while, if you're just that flailing inflatable thing at the car lots, you're not moving anywhere. You got to put some wheels on that thing, right? You got to put some wheels on that thing so you can move forward, go somewhere. But that intentionality piece, and the reason I bring that up, Talib, and you probably know this all as well. Like, we hear a lot of people say, be consistent, be consistent, be consistent. Yeah, you can be consistently bad though. You can be consistently moving without intention, and so that intention piece, it's the multiplier. It's the multiplier.
Absolutely. A few more questions, and I'm gonna let you go.
Sure.
Season 3 of Black is America is what you're currently promoting and working on. What can listeners expect from this new season, and how does it build upon or differ from the previous seasons?
So in this season, what we're doing is we're just highlighting more amazing stories, right? And also, I just released the preview, so that's available now, and and a few of the other episodes as well from seasons 1 and 2. I'm highlighting stuff that I promised my listeners before that I didn't get around to, right? Because something came up and I wanted to produce a different story, stuff like that. For instance, the 50th anniversary of hip hop was last year, so I wanted to do a Sylvia Robinson piece and the Sugar Hill Gang, you know what I mean? But so this year I'm going back to some of the roots, right? Some of the previews. So one of these episodes I'm going to be doing is about Guion Bluford, the first African American to go into space, and that's an amazing tale. But also Ann Lowe, the woman who's a fashion designer who did the dress for Jackie Kennedy's wedding and John F. Kennedy's wedding and stuff like that. So we're just going back to the basics a little bit and really just doubling down on some storytelling with some surprise guests, some really cool, editing techniques that I want to kind of try out and stuff like that. And so, that's what people can come to expect, man. We put out a very high quality show, I believe. And so we want to make sure that we own up to it, but also, Talib, this is also the last season of Black is America. As well, and so I know there's a lot of people that's a little upset about that, but it's just one of those things where, and we talked about this earlier, that sometimes you just want to go out on top. There's also a thing where you want to try different things and try unique things, we see this in sports and TV shows where people say, oh, you should do another season of Insecure, or you should come back for another season and do this. But sometimes as those creators, like, listen, as much joy as we love to bring to you with these pieces, we want to grow as content creators. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to do things that even we don't want to do in order to do that. And sometimes that's letting something go when it's time to let it go, right? So, and who's to say it won't come back, right? Black is America could come back, but as of right now, season 3 seems like a good stopping point to try some other type of content. And I have tons of ideas, but season 3, Black is America, you'd expect, like I said, some great storyline about Guion Bluford and Lowe. I think we got a phenomenal piece working for Memorial Day about Alvin Cash, who won the Medal of Honor. stuff like that. And so, but also Garrett A. Morgan. I really did some fun stuff with Garrett A. Morgan this season that I think people are going to enjoy. So it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. We're going to go out with a bang. Go out with a bang.
That's awesome. I can't wait, man. That sounds amazing. Now, not that you haven't already given free game this whole time, right? But from your experience, what advice would you give to our audience of podcast hosts and audio professionals about defining success in podcasting beyond just the numbers?
I love this question because I have a t-shirt I had somebody make for me that I posted on Instagram that says F them downloads, because I think we get so enamored with the numbers that we forget that there's other ways to define success in this game. For example, like I said, with Recovery Replay, anytime I get a text message, phone call, email to say, hey, I went and got some help after listening to your episode, that's the world to me. That's better than any award, any amount of money. Like you told me you went and got some help for something you've been, dealing with for a long time. That hits me to no end. And there's also, critical acclaim, right? I think a lot of people see the some of the accolades and awards that we've been able to win, that we've had a blessing to win, but that's part of the strategy as well as far as the success, right? I absolutely love, and my mentor, Krista Hill, I kind of get on her nerves with this one, but I honestly, Talib, love being, how you watch the Oscars and like somebody wins best picture, you're like, what movie is that? I've never heard of that movie before. And so it's like that, not have that commercial success in that regard, but that critical acclaim success, right? So again, that's just a different avenue to judge your podcast, right? So if you're helping people getting critical acclaim, or you're building a community, right? That's definitely one where, you may not have 50,000 people. If you got a good 50 and they ride for you, ain't nothing like that. Ain't nothing like that, because those people who have 50,000, it's probably mostly bots anyway. So I wouldn't even trust it in regard. But if you got a good, strong 50 and they ride for you, that's also a level of success. But I think, again, and I'm not trying to knock numbers and downloads and views and stuff like that. That's a very important piece, but it's not the only piece. And so there's like I said, there's different avenues to judge that success.
Absolutely. We had, I think, one of our virtual conferences back in, maybe it was the 2021, we did a session with Lipson and Bethany Hawkins, and it was about, people are so excited, my podcast, and they talking about it, and then you ask them about the downloads, and all of a sudden, now they're not quite as excited, and that's got to shift.
It does. And even if you were to go with the numbers, right? I think it was Buzzsprout or somebody who put out a study that said, hey, if you get 126 downloads in the first 7 days or something like that, that puts you in the top 50%. So it's like, even with that, there's perspectives to this, right? So again, if you're able to put out a quality product and put out a quality piece of work, people are going to notice, right? Obviously you got to do the marketing and let people know you exist and stuff like that, but people are going to notice. And just because it ain't a 50,000, 100,000 downloads, it's not the end of the world. It's really not. There's other ways to judge success. Listen, Black as America has 18 awards by itself, right? It probably has just over 5,000 downloads total. But I can tell you right now, Black as America has paid for itself more ways than one. Right. And being able to have opportunities to work with Latrice Sampson's Richards on a project that she's working with the United Way, being able to do that and stuff like that, being able to get that whole read between the line comedy we talked about earlier with the Meadows. You can do with that what you will. So again, if you're able to make quality work, it's more than just the numbers. It's more than just the numbers, and people realize that.
Absolutely, man. I love that you broke that down. So forever be broke. That's great.
Right.
So finally, as a podcast host and audio professional, what future trends or developments do you foresee in podcasting, particularly in the realm of Black content?
Well, I know right now short form is where it's at right now. A lot of people are in that short form game, 60 seconds, 30 seconds, stuff like that. So I would love to see how that evolves, right? Not necessarily sure exactly how it will, but I think there's something there, right? I think being able to, be able to weave a narrative in a short frame of time it's a true talent. It really is, to get the whole scope of it and stuff like that. And as somebody who does long form, I'm very fascinated by that. Some people will be, maybe feel some type of way or fearful of it. I welcome it, right? Because first of all, we need more storytellers in this space. We need more storytellers who look like us in this space. So if you're finding a niche with, YouTube shorts or Instagram reels or whatever, I highly, tell you to double down on it, right? Try in some sound design with it or whatever, right? And make sure that sound design makes sense for you. But that's what I would, I think I'm loving that I'm seeing with this short form content is that it's really taken off, and I want to see more people of color really do something with that.
Well, this has been such a great conversation. I've enjoyed every minute of it. So thank you so much for being here. Tell people how they can find you, the podcast, website, social media, whatever it is.
Absolutely. So again, Talib, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for so much for what you do for the Black podcast community. Just know that it's a space where, I can always come in and feel like I'm at home. Right. And there's no place like that, especially when you're a Black audio professional in this space. You can find me on, LinkedIn or Instagram, on Instagram, the real Dominic Lawson, on Dominic, on LinkedIn, just first name, last name. And you can find Black is America on any of your major podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the whole nine. Season 3 debuts February 1st, right on the first day of Black History Month. As well. And also, if you want to check out some of my work with the Meadows, Recovery Replay, and Beyond Theory, beyondtheorypodcast.com, recoveryreplay.com. They all have their own websites, and you can find both seasons 1 through 5. We're currently on season 6 of Beyond Theory. You can check out that, and also be debuting season 3 of Recovery Replay later this year in May. So seasons 1 and 2 are available there. And also, obviously, blackisamericapodcast.com. Check out seasons 1 and 2 on that website, and also check out the season that's coming up as well. If I can introduce you to one episode for Black is America, check out the Tom Lee one. That's the one that that told ESPN and Slate Magazine, go sit down somewhere and take this hot L for you. So the Tom Lee episode is the one that people really love and enjoy, because we do some really cool audio things and editing things with that episode.
Awesome, man. And I would be remiss. You're saying we, right? So is there a team? And if there is, shout them out.
Absolutely. So, me and my wife is, she created the namesake for Black is America. She, is, inspirational through and through. Real quick story. When I got sick one time trying to do the startup life, and I knew the show had to go on, she stepped in and did the episode for me, right? She's not really a podcaster, even though she's really starting to come on the scene. She's actually starting a podcast pretty soon, the B Word here in March for Women's International Women's Month and stuff like that. But my wife is everything as well. Also, a person who created my cover art, Alexandria Eddings, the Black is America cover art, just does a phenomenal work. And all the contributors that I've had on Black is America, from Terry Stevens to a gamut of them. They've just been very phenomenal, contributing to the show and really providing that expertise that you need for a history show, right? That's kind of important. But yeah, just appreciative of all those people that have contributed to Black is America.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to close this out. You just stay right there for me. I want to give a big thanks to our Afros in Audio and Black Podcasters Association members for supporting our commitment for community and collaboration. If you'd like to join the Black Podcasters Association, the link will be in the description. And if you want to join us at the 6th Annual Afros in Audio Podcast Festival, visit afrosinaudio.com. Follow at Afros in Audio on all social media channels, and you can find me at Talib Jasir on Instagram. Thanks again, Dominic, for being a part of Afros in Audio's Black History Month interview series. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.